All right, welcome back, sort of, everybody. Again, I'm Dina Harley with CBS 17 News. We, of course, have been covering the double murder trial out of Orange County where Issiah Ross, right now, a jury is deciding his fate. That jury is at lunch right now. Just a few minutes ago, or maybe earlier today, they asked for a shorter lunch today. So they're at lunch right now. They'll be back around 1:10. While we have the time and while we're waiting, I wanted to just go over what we've seen so far, take us from the very beginning to today to the jury at lunch right now. So that's what we're going to do right now, go through some testimony, go through the main evidence or major evidence that we've heard, and just talk about all of that. Let's do a brief overview of the case in case you missed some details or you're just catching up. Issiah Ross was 17 years old in 2022. The weekend of September 16th, he was hanging out with Devin Clark, who was 18 years old at the time, and Lyric Woods, who was 14 years old at the time. That is where this entire case originated, on the night very late of September 16th of 2022. On the next day, on September 17th, Lyric's family reported her missing, and Devin's family noticed that they could not get in touch with him. The state has been arguing that Issiah killed both Lyric and Devin early in the hours of September 17th on that Saturday morning. They have argued that Issiah went and picked up Devin and Lyric, took them to an area near Buckhorn Road, and killed both of them. Both of them, we know from evidence, and I'll get to more of this later, we know that both of them were shot several times in the back of their bodies. And so the state has argued that this was a cold-blooded killing, that Issiah killed them both, left their bodies off this gravel road area off Buckhorn Road, and then went home, spent the weekend just as normal with family and just kind of hanging out, and then got on a bus in Raleigh and went to Delaware. So they're saying he went to Delaware to flee the state. He was arrested in Delaware a few weeks later, I believe like 3 or so weeks later, and has been in custody ever since. The state, their main argument is that this happened in self-defense. So they say that Issiah picked up Devin on the night of, very late on the night of the 16th. They say that Devin invited Issiah out, said, hey, we can go hang out. We can essentially, and let me take this moment to say that you're going to hear me say some graphic things. And of course it's uncomfortable. Of course it's hard because we're talking about teenagers here. And the whole thing is just brutal, of course. But what I'm saying is translated from what the attorneys are saying and from what the evidence has showed. So the defense says that Devin essentially asked Issiah for a ride in exchange for having sex for Lyric. And when I say in exchange, I mean that Devin was saying he was going to have sex with Lyric, and then Issiah would also be able to have sex with Lyric. The defense says that they got to an area off Buckhorn Road, all three of them. Issiah had never met Lyric before, and that Devin and Lyric had sex, or they were alone in the car together. And then they say that Devin shot and killed Lyric after the two of them had an argument, turned the gun on Issiah, and then Issiah had to act in self-defense. We've heard testimony that he went to Delaware, because that has been a big part of this. If you know, why did he flee the state? We heard testimony that he went to Delaware because he got into an argument with his mom about damage to her car after he was driving it, and she kicked him out, and he had family in Delaware that he was going to stay with. So the defense says this was not him fleeing the state. This was him essentially being kicked out of his home and having nowhere else to go. So he had to get on a bus to Delaware. That, and we'll get more into their arguments and testimony as we're going through that, but those are the two overarching arguments. Last week, it started with a plea deal offer from the state. When I'm looking down here, I'm just looking down at my notes. Obviously, I've been taking extensive notes over the last almost 2 weeks. The state last week offered Issiah a plea deal. So they said that if he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder, because again, he is charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, they said if he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder, they would accept that, and he would receive 2 consecutive sentences of 20 to 25 years. That means with time served, he would be out in less than 40 years. He declined that almost immediately. There was no major discussion. There was, talk between the judge and Issiah, just making sure you understand you're declining this. You understand the state could never make you another offer again for the duration of the trial. And Issiah said yes. Then last week, we went into jury selection. That lasted a full day and then a couple hours into the following day. The jury is, if I'm remembering correctly, and I'm not going to be able to find this in my notes right now, is 9 men and 3 women. I said this earlier today when we were talking. Something about the jury to keep in mind is that this is a case involving teenagers, and we have heard really graphic testimony throughout the entire trial about messages between the teenagers, sexual interactions between the teenagers, drugs, guns, obviously. And something to keep in mind when we're talking about jury selection is that jury members are given the facts, the evidence, and then the law. And they obviously, in an ideal world, follow that law and make their decisions based off of that. But we also have to take into account the humanity of jury members. And from my recollection from jury selection, because I was sitting in the courtroom for that, a lot of the jury members are parents, and some of them talked about having teenage children and having children around this age. And so I've been thinking of that today while we know we're back there deliberating, just how much that will play into their decision in this case. But that's jury selection. And then we got started with testimony. And when we talk about testimony, I want to talk about some of the most compelling testimony that we've heard, and just really some of the ones that have stuck with me. And when I'm talking to my colleagues or to other people about this case, the testimony that they've also pointed out. It started last week with really emotional testimony from Elizabeth Canada. She is Lyric's mom. She testified that on the night of the 16th, Lyric came to her around 11 o'clock at night. She said she was going to sleep. She said goodnight. She said she was going to take a shower first, and her mom testified that they actually had a little joke between them, and she said don't take a long shower because Lyric was known to do that. So she says that's the last time she saw her daughter. Lyric went to bed that night, or so her mom thought, and then the next day they had plans, the mom, Lyric, and Lyric's sister, to decorate their house for fall. And so Elizabeth testified that she let Lyric sleep in a little bit, and then she sent her younger daughter to go in and wake Lyric up. And that's when they discovered that Lyric was not in her room and that she was missing. Something that stood out to me with her testimony is that Elizabeth testified that she took Lyric's phone at night and kept it away. And when we're talking about how the three of them met up, we know that they were all, or excuse me, Devin and Lyric were messaging each other late that night. And her mom said that she was using an iPad for that. But that's something that stuck out to me because these messages were a big part of the evidence, were a big part of how these three even got together that night. So then they report her missing on the 17th, on that Saturday. On the 18th, Elizabeth hears through law enforcement friends and fire department friends that two bodies were found off of Buckhorn Road. I want you to take a listen into some of her testimony from earlier last week. It's just heartbreaking. Let's take a listen into it.
And his window was down. And I just ran up to him and I said, "It's not her, right?" Because I was keeping it together. Nobody else was, but it's so far-fetched that somebody would want to hurt her. And he just got out of the car. He didn't say anything. He just hugged me. I was like, "I'm so sorry." And I collapsed. And probably screamed a scream I never want to hear again. And then I just walked away, and I just needed nobody around. I couldn't explain it. And I just wanted to know what happened. And he wouldn't tell me for a little bit. And then they came back later on. They brought us in the house and told us that they were shot.
Really, really heartbreaking testimony from her. Something else from her testimony that stood out to me quite a bit was she said that she had never heard of Devin Clark. She also said that, teenagers, they talk, especially 14-year-old, 18-year-olds. And she said that she had even asked Lyric's friends if any of them had ever heard of Devin Clark, because you have to remember there are no messages between Lyric and Isaiah. Isaiah actually testified, and I'll talk more about this in a bit. He testified that he had never met Lyric before. He didn't know who she was. So Lyric's mom testified that she had asked Lyric's friends, "Have you ever heard of Devin Clark? Have you ever heard this name, this username?" And they said no. And so that's something else that stuck out to me there. I've been posting about this case on social media, and a lot of the comments we've been getting, and that even my colleagues and I have been talking about were, how did they all know each other? So that stood out to me with her testimony. Also, last week, we heard from a man named Antoine Bryant. He was a stepfather figure to Isaiah. He had been in a relationship with Isaiah's mom before the murders. There's been kind of conflicting testimony on whether they were still dating at the time of the murders, but that's not super relevant. So he testified that on Saturday, Lyric and Devin were killed in the very early mornings of that Saturday, September 17th. Antoine Bryant testified that on Saturday he got a call from Isaiah's mom saying that she wanted him to come over because her and Isaiah were arguing about some damage to her car. He goes over to the house. He says this is an hours-long argument. He goes over there. They look at the car. There is some damage to it, and he basically says that they came to an agreement then that Isaiah was going to go stay with Antoine because his mom kicked him out because they were arguing. Isaiah goes to stay at Antoine's house for the weekend. And he has a plan since Saturday Antoine testified, to go to Delaware, where he had family, and that was kind of his more long-term plan, to go to Delaware and stay there. He's staying in Antoine's house. Antoine says things were mostly normal. He said Isaiah was a little quiet, but that wasn't super out of the norm for him. He spent a lot of time outside, and things were, for all intents and purposes, normal that weekend. Antoine is also related to Devin Clark. He said he's a first cousin, and the way he described it is their family all lives very close together, whether that's on the same block, same neighborhood. So they were all nearby, spent a lot of time together. He testified that on Saturday he heard that Devin was missing. And at first, it was just that family couldn't get in touch with Devin. A lot of their phone calls were going to voicemail. And then later on that weekend, he finds out that Devin's body was found. On Sunday, he had agreed to take Isaiah to the bus stop in Raleigh. So this is in Orange County. I think he said it was like 45 minutes to an hour-long drive to Raleigh. He agreed to take Isaiah to the bus stop on that Sunday evening. He does that. He says on the drive to Raleigh that Isaiah is, again, kind of quiet, but nothing super out of the norm. He did testify, though, that while they were waiting for the bus, it was dark out, and Antoine didn't want to just leave Isaiah there because he said that he wouldn't want somebody to do that to his kid, and so he wasn't going to just take him to a dark bus stop and drop him off there. So he's hanging out in the car, and he said Isaiah was hanging out of the car, and he said that was like a little weird. He just kind of didn't know exactly where he was because he was sitting kind of outside of the car to the side, and then the bus comes, Isaiah gets on the bus, and then Antoine says he called him when the bus drove away just to say, hey, you're all situated, I'm making sure you're good before I drive back to Orange County. He drives back, a few days go by, and he testified that he is pulling up to his own home back in Orange County, and he's getting out of the car with his son, who is a few years younger than Isaiah. Police confront them. They're at the house either waiting or they pull up at the same time. And he testified that police confronted him and his son. He said, what's going on? Why are you guys here? Why are you confronting my son? The name Isaiah comes out. And Antoine says, no, that's my son, Elijah. That's not Isaiah. He starts talking to police and then said something to police along the lines of, hey, I don't want to get involved in anything right now because my family has enough going on. Because you have to remember, he had recently found out that Devin's body was found. Police say to him, are you talking about Devin? And he said to police, how do you know that? And they said, that's actually why we're here, because we think Isaiah is involved. So let's take a listen into some of his testimony when he had that conversation with police.
That's when they said, well, we think that maybe Isaiah had something to do with it. And I was like, what? No. And the officers like sort of grabbed me by, he's like, just, you'll be all right. He said, I know. He said, it's surprised. I said, yeah. I said, it's very surprising. I said, no. I said, how is this? And he said, well, that's what we're thinking. I said, but I said, you mean to tell me this person probably killed my cousin? I said, they were just here at my house. I said, I just fed them. I just gave them a ride. I said, I was looking out for them. I said, no.
And again, just more emotional, compelling testimony from him, especially because he talked about how he was looking out for Isaiah a lot. And he, even on the drive to the bus stop, was telling Isaiah, hey, work things out with your mom. Hey, you got to finish school. So just emotional there. One of the potentially most important witnesses for the state. And I say potentially most important because when we talk about witnesses that are on the stand, it's all about believability and credibility. And so right now, the jury, well, they're at lunch right now, but when they come back, they'll be on their chambers. And again, going back to the humanity of each jury member, we need to think about when you're watching somebody on the stand, I might believe every word they're saying. The person next to me might not believe a single word they're saying. That is really going to come into play with a man named Christian Sykes. And I say that's going to come into play with him because his testimony is completely different from Issiah Ross's testimony. Christian Sykes is a man that says he was friends with Issiah. He didn't testify, He told police in an interview that they did have a sexual relationship at one point as well. And I'm just trying to pull up video here if you see me looking down. He testified that Issiah texted him or called him the day after the murder and basically said, last night was crazy. And Christian says he was like, what are you talking about? And then some point that weekend, Christian testified that he and Issiah got on a video call on Snapchat. He says Issiah confessed to the murders to him. He says that Issiah told him Devin brought a gun. They were in the area of Buckhorn Road, and that Devin had this gun and he was beaming it, aka like showing the light on the gun, pointing it at Issiah. Christian testified that Issiah told him he told Devin to stop several times and Devin did not, so Issiah grabbed the gun and shot Devin. Christian Sykes says that Issiah told him after that he shot and killed Lyric because she witnessed it all. Some things about his testimony that are important to consider is that he testified that this happened inside of the car, or that's what he assumed from his conversation with Issiah. We essentially know that the shootings did not happen inside of the car just because of DNA evidence, blood evidence, all of that stuff. So that was something that the defense and even Issiah himself, when he took the stand, talked about. Let's take a listen into some of Christian Sykes' testimony earlier this week. I will say that he, in the closing arguments for the state, they even testified that he did not want to be there. I kind of talked about this earlier this week. It's what we call in the legal field an uncooperative witness, and that does not mean that they are purposely trying to be troublesome or anything like that or difficult. In this case, Christian did say that he was nervous to come forward to police at all, even back in 2022, because he was worried about getting involved in this case, and he was kind of scared of Issiah at the time because he believed that Issiah had just killed 2 people. So we're actually it's not his testimony, I'm going to play a video of some of his interview with police back in 2022. He did not know this was being recorded at the time.
He said that they was wrestling for the gun, and he said that the boy was shooting the gun as they was wrestling. He said it shot 2 times, and then he got the gun, shot him, and then turned around and shot the girl because she saw everything. And in my head, the reason why I wasn't believing it, because I was thinking okay, if I'm in the back seat, right, and 2 people are wrestling for a gun and it's going off, I'm not going to continue to sit in the back seat.
And again, his testimony pretty compelling for the state because he says that Issiah confessed to this. I will in a second get to Issiah's testimony where he says that is not true. But before we get there, I do want to talk a little bit just about the evidence that we've seen. And I am not going to play thoughts from that because a lot of it was very technical. So I'm just going to break it down a little bit. We heard a lot from investigators with the Orange County Sheriff's Office, a number of them talking about the crime scene investigation here, how they got involved, how they identified Issiah as a suspect, and how they collected evidence at the scene. A lot of the evidence is shell casings. They talked a lot about shell casings, where they were found, how many were found. The weapon, the gun used in the killings has never been found. A lot of the shell casings, the investigators testified that they could have came from the same weapon, but without the gun to actually analyze that and to investigate it, they can't tell that for sure. They did talk a lot about shell casings, where they were found, and they also talked a lot about blood evidence, both blood evidence at the scene where the bodies were found and blood evidence inside of this white GMC. We heard a lot about the white GMC. Before I get to that, let's talk about the actual crime scene itself. And again, graphic, obviously hard to talk about and hard to imagine, but it's the evidence that the jury was presented with. They were told that Lyric and Devin were both found on their backs with their arms out in a T shape, and they were found lying next to each other. Both of them had obvious gunshot wounds to their body. Devin, they testified, some investigators testified that his pants were down a little bit. It looked like he had been dragged or drugged through an area. And so that's where the bodies were found, and they analyzed, obviously, the evidence around there. The white GMC that we heard a lot about, we heard about this car that was thought to have been at the scene. We later found out that this is the car that belonged to Isaiah's mom. If that sounds familiar, it's probably because we know already that Isaiah's mom and him got into an argument about damage to the car. So let's talk about the evidence inside of the car. Police did say, an investigator said, that they used luminol inside of the car to check for blood. That, of course, is a substance or a chemical that you can spray on an area, and if blood was ever present there or recently present there, it glows blue. Investigators testified that they did find some blood evidence inside of the car. They really focused a lot on blood evidence that they found on the roof of the car. And this, even days later, is sticking in my mind, that the one investigator testified that the print or the pattern that they were able to find on the roof of the car, he said looked as if, and I'm going to try to get myself on camera here, as if somebody had their fingertips along the roof of the car and then a palm up, and it was near the light. And so he said that it kind of looked like somebody had blood on their hand and was reaching for the light and looking for it, and then maybe hit the light with their hand. The white GMC also did have some external damage to it, which is what Isaiah and his mom got into a fight about, and investigators testified to that as well. Other evidence, they talked a lot about cell phone data that put all of them in the area of Buckhorn Road on that night, and they also testified to the times that Lyric's phone and Devin's phone went offline. Devin's phone went offline. Devin's phone has never been recovered. Isaiah, later in his testimony, testified that he dumped it, that he got rid of the phone and some other evidence from that scene, like Devin's backpack and stuff. So they talked a lot about the cell phone data. They also went through a long time of messages, and that was a big part of the testimony as well, these messages between Devin and some other people. So investigators testified that on the night of the 16th, in the late hours on that Friday night, Devin was in a group chat and then also messaging some other people on Snapchat and social media asking for a ride. He said that he was going to have sex with a girl and that he needed a ride. And then he said that essentially if somebody gave him a ride, they could also have sex with the girl. We know that those messages exist because investigators were able to recover them. It is the only communication that they took from Devin's phone. Isaiah, let's talk about his testimony because that leads perfectly into that. Isaiah did testify that he was hanging out with Devin that night. I'm pulling up my notes for this because I want to make sure I don't misquote anything. He says that, blah, 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 excuse me, I'm just going down here on my notes. Okay, he says that on the night of September 16th of 2022, he was mentioned in a group chat by Devin, and then he saw a DM on Snapchat, went right to that message. Devin messaged him asking for a ride and asked if he wanted quote-unquote free buns. Several people have testified in this case that the free buns that we've been hearing means sex. He told Devin that he could go, he could pick him up. He takes his mom's car without her permission. He goes to Devin's house. He says they shook hands. Everything was fine. Everything was normal. He asked where they were going, and Devin said they were going to go pick up a girl. Isaiah testified that when they were on the way there or driving around, that Devin said something along the lines of, "Do you mind if I go first?" And again, I cannot say enough that it's uncomfortable, it's graphic, but it's the evidence that the jury heard. And that's when Isaiah said that he understood that they were only going to pick up one girl. So it sounds like Isaiah thought maybe this was a group hangout or something like that. They go pick up Lyric. They go to the area of Buckhorn Road. Isaiah testifies that he gets out of the car to give Lyric and Devin some privacy, some time together. And he says that he's just hanging out outside of the car. He's using Devin's vape. He said he might have been scrolling through his phone. He doesn't remember very well. And then he says he heard voices. He heard some sort of argument. And then he says Devin got out of the car and there's some sort of argument between Lyric and Devin. And he says that he heard Lyric say to Devin, "You can't treat me this way. You can't, essentially she's saying you can't offer me up for sex to other people." And they're arguing about it. And he says Devin started saying something back to Isaiah, and then Devin reached into the car, pulled out a gun. Lyric was backing up with her hands up. Devin was walking quickly at Lyric, and Isaiah testified that that's when he heard gunshots. Something I want to point out here is that Isaiah testified that after he says Devin shot Lyric, Devin asked if they were ready to go and if Isaiah could stay quiet. And Isaiah says that he told Devin no. He testified another time that Devin pointed the gun at him and said, "You know what time it is," and Isaiah took that as Devin saying that he was also going to kill Isaiah. Either way, in either scenario, Isaiah said that he and Devin eventually got into an argument over the gun because Isaiah was nervous and Devin was pointing the gun at him. And Isaiah says that that is when he was fearing for his own life. I want you to take a listen into some of his testimony when he took the stand in his own defense.
I would have died. Thank you. I would have died. If I had sat there and let him do what he was going to do, I wouldn't be here speaking to you guys right now.
And that was some of his testimony. Like I said, there was obviously some cross-examination for him as well. The state was asking him questions, if that's the case, if you were scared for your life, why did you shoot so many times? Why did you leave the state? Why didn't you call police? And he said he just lost it at one point. He also said that he didn't even remember how many shots that he fired. At one point when he was being asked about why he didn't call the police and why he just went home, he said he felt like his brain was melting and that he believed at the time that if he was just able to get home, that would solve his problems. That was his testimony. The state then questioned him. Something that stuck out to me in their cross-examination of Isaiah was they were asking him about messages that he sent the following day and the day after, so Saturday and Sunday. The state had evidence that he had been messaging people in a group chat. Some other people were saying, "Hey, Devin is missing. Nobody can get in touch with Devin." And Isaiah was allegedly saying back to them, "No, he might be at home. Like, I'm sure it's fine. Why isn't he?" But then he did start saying, "Why isn't he answering us?" And then when somebody said that Devin's body had been found, there's allegedly a message from Isaiah saying, like, "I can't believe it. It can't be true." The state, obviously, they're trying to say that Isaiah was covering his tracks. And he had told people, I guess, in the day or two after that he wasn't even in the state at the time. And so the state trying to paint a picture of him covering his tracks there. He wrapped up his testimony yesterday. Sorry, let me backtrack. I want to talk about what he says happened with Christian Sykes, because like I mentioned earlier, Christian Sykes' testimony was a big part of this. Isaiah said that he and Christian Sykes were cool. They would smoke weed together sometimes and just kind of hang out, and Christian Sykes would sometimes give him a ride. He says that he did talk to Christian Sykes on Sunday after the murders, and he says that Sykes asked Ross if he wanted to smoke weed. He says that he wasn't in the mood, and then Christian Sykes, was saying what happened, and then Ross says he broke and started giving him a brief rundown of what happened and told Christian Sykes that he almost died. He says he can't remember word for word what he told Christian, but it was only a very brief rundown. He says he told Sykes he almost died and then just started going off, says it was a brief description again, and he testified that he did not relay this version of events that Christian Sykes testified to. That brings us to yesterday when he finished up his testimony, and then we went into closing arguments. The defense in their closing argument was taking this stand of this is a tragedy all around. We're talking about teenagers here. We're talking about 2 dead teenagers and another teenager who is facing the rest of his life in prison, and his life is changed forever because of this. And then the state taking the stance of this is a cold-blooded murder. The defendant is right here. The jury has a job here to put him in jail for the rest of his life. I want you to take a listen into some of their closing arguments, and then I'm going to play another clip from the state because something from their closing argument has stuck out to me since I heard it. So let's take a first listen into snippets from both of their arguments.
We're teenagers once. All of us made bad decisions. Snuck out. Broke the rules, but it didn't have such a serious consequence. All of these individuals should have followed the rules. Should have been home. And now we're here today to talk about the conduct that occurred.
And while youth may explain immaturity, it does not excuse violence. At 17, the defendant was old enough to understand what a gun does. He was old enough to understand that pulling the trigger ends lives, and he was old enough to stop.
Something that stood out to me a lot with the state closing argument, and I gotta backtrack a little bit here because Isaiah is charged with first-degree murder in both of their deaths. This is a question I have talked to my colleagues about, people online about, and so I know a lot of people are thinking about it. The state does not have an obligation with a first-degree murder charge to prove motive. They don't even have to mention it. They don't have to say that word one time during trial. They don't even have to prove, really, that they knew each other. The state, throughout the entire trial, has not even tiptoed in the area of motive. They have not said, they have not hypothesized until yesterday during closing arguments. We know already from the evidence that sex was some sort of conversation between Isaiah and Devin and Lyric, people around that night. I want you to take a listen in because for the first time yesterday, and let me make sure I have it pulled up. For the first time yesterday, the state sort of offered a theory on a motive here. I'll have you listen in and then I'll talk about it.
It gave a ride under the impression that he would have a turn. Perhaps this is what sparked the disagreement. Lyric and Devin finished what they were doing. The defendant stepped up, expecting his turn, and Lyric balked because that is not what she signed up for.
So again, their Assistant District Attorney Anna Orr is saying maybe that's the motive here. Maybe Isaiah believed from the messages with Devin that he was going to have a turn with Lyric, and then when Lyric said no, that's not what she thought was happening, Isaiah just lost it and shot and killed both of them. So that was closing arguments yesterday. The jury got their instructions, and then they started deliberating around 4 o'clock. So let's talk a little bit about the jury instructions. The instructions are pretty standard for first-degree murder cases. They're being instructed on, this is the law, this is what you have to follow, and this is what evidence you can consider, what evidence you can't consider. There was some discussion yesterday between the judge and the attorneys about the self-defense instruction. The Judge Stephanie Reese, at one point said, hey, I'm going to give the instruction just so we're all clear. And then the state objected to that. And there was some back and forth. And for a little bit there, it seemed like Judge Reese might change her mind and not give the self-defense instruction. She decided then to give it. And of course, that is a win, a minor win there for the defense, just that the jury is allowed to consider self-defense in this case. They also had some discussion about options for the jury. So I want to go through those quickly. So let's talk about Lyric first because that one is a little more cut and dry. In the death of Lyric Woods, the jury can find Issiah Ross guilty or not guilty. That is it. There's no self-defense argument in Lyric's death. There's no other option for that. It's either guilty or not guilty of first-degree murder. For Devin Clark and his death, it's a lot different. The jury can find Issiah Ross either guilty or not guilty of first-degree murder, of second-degree murder, of voluntary manslaughter, or they can find him not guilty by reason of self-defense. First-degree murder, of course, is what he was charged with initially. Second-degree murder is step under that, if you want to say. And then the voluntary manslaughter one is the one that I want to talk about a little bit. And they talked about this yesterday, and this is really the most interesting situation, in my opinion, because the voluntary manslaughter conviction could be the jury's answer if they do believe that Isaiah acted in self-defense but used excessive force or used overkill. So if they believe that Isaiah did argue with Devin about the gun, that he was fearful for his life, he did believe that Devin was a threat to him, and then he shot Devin in self-defense but kept shooting when Devin was walking away, running away, fleeing from Isaiah, then a voluntary manslaughter conviction would fit. A really important note is that for first or second degree murder, they cannot convict him of that. They cannot find him guilty of that if they believe at all that he acted in self-defense. Those cannot be convictions if self-defense was part of it. So that is where we are at with what he can be convicted of in the death of Devin. So again, first degree murder, guilty or not guilty for Lyric, first, second, or degree murder, or voluntary manslaughter for Devin, or not guilty by reason of self-defense. Earlier today, the jury came in and they were, well, last night and then they got it today. The jury came in and they asked for cell phone records. They wanted to see those again. They wanted to see crime scene photos. They wanted to see the video of Isaiah at a gas station after the murders, and they wanted to see the video of the Christian Sykes interview with police. Most recently, right before lunchtime, they asked for the autopsies of both victims and they asked for a shorter lunch. So they are supposed to come back in just 2 minutes, timed this out perfectly. They're supposed to come back in just 2 minutes to continue their deliberations. The judge, we in North Carolina are expecting a big winter storm this weekend, and the judge has been very clear that she does not want that to influence the jury at all. She doesn't want to rush them or anything like that. She did say that there's a chance right now, and we'll have to see how the weather plays out, obviously, but there's a chance right now that court is closed on Monday if the weather is really bad, but she does not want that to influence the jury. So that is where we are at right now with it. We're going to take a really quick break right now, just a 2-minute break, and then we'll be back when the jury is back or when we see some movement in the courtroom. So we'll be back in just a few minutes.